Hey everyone, Tony here with another edition of Transparency Tuesday coming at you from Toronto. Today, I want to dive a bit deeper into why I've been seeing a lack of positions as part of our recurring short put strategy and how we're planning to address this moving forward. First of all, I do want to be upfront in saying that these large gap times, they are quite long and in our view, unacceptable moving forward. I can certainly start to understand the frustration around these large gap times, especially as these large gap times have been happening since a fairly sizable loss closer to the beginning of the year, making it making you start to question, wow, it's quite long to start making up these losses. Will I ever start making up these losses? That kind of thing, right? This is why I really wanted to do a more detailed explanation in terms of why we've been seeing these large gaps and what's been happening in the market that's been causing these gaps specifically. So yeah, let's get started. I actually have some visual aids with me today as well. There are a few kind of more in-depth concepts, some more complex concepts that I wanted to kind of illustrate via visual aids and some graphs as well. So that's what this is for here. It's just my notes app on my iPad. So as some of you guys may know, the logic around this initial strategy here, it's all about delta, right? We're looking at a specific delta range to see if there was a strike price or there's a strike price on Deribit for a put option that has a delta that fits within that range that we're looking for. And the way that I've identified this delta is to look, of course, via backtesting as well as historical analysis. For those of you who might be unfamiliar with delta, it's the measure of how much an option's value changes for every dollar change in the underlying asset's price. In our case, Bitcoin. If this starts sounding like a bit of a derivative, it starts sounding like a calculus class in university or grade 12, it's because it kind of totally is, actually. There's a lot of derivatives, there's a lot of calculus type stuff in options, and you'll kind of keep seeing that. But one of the kind of correlated things about delta as well is that delta is actually very much correlated to the probability that an option would expire in the money versus out of the money. Hence why we kind of prioritized looking at delta when we were ideating around initial strategies, because it's usually a good representation of that in terms of probability of expiring in the money versus out of the money. And hence why we kind of one of the things we did with this strategy was, of course, do backtesting to see which delta range is optimal and stuff like that. So the next thing I want to illustrate is the relationship between strike prices and delta. So the thing with delta is and strike prices is that each strike price actually corresponds to a different delta value. And when you really think about the probability definition that I talked about earlier, it kind of makes sense. Right now Bitcoin's price is around 39K. If you think about the let's say 35K strike price versus 36 strike price and stuff like that. Well, if we're at 39K right now, chances are it's a higher probability that it would stay above 35K versus the chances that it would stay above 36K, just because 35K is a further away strike price, and hence why it's more likely that we would stay above that price. And that's why you would kind of start seeing that the delta value for 35K would be different from the delta value of 36K. And we kind of see this in live market data as well. So this was a screenshot that I took of Deribit. I believe its expiry is for tomorrow. And these are just like different strike prices for puts that we see. So right here on the left, that's the column of the different strike prices. So we see a range from 36K to 40K. And on the right here, it's the delta values that correspond to each of these prices. And one of the immediate things that you'll see is that there's this relationship here, right? There's this relationship where you see, okay, interesting. The higher the strike price that you go, the more negative that the delta gets. So the lower the delta gets. And so that's a very interesting relationship. And so we'll kind of see the same relationship here when we graph it. So right here, this is a graph of put delta values over different strike prices. And we kind of see the same immediately. We kind of see the same relationship that I mentioned before, whether it's a high volatility case, which is represented by this by this red line here, or this low volatility case, which is represented by this green line here. We see that as we go right on this graph, on this x-axis, as we go right, which means as we're looking at higher strike prices, typically we see the delta values for these strike prices go down. And so we see a negative slope for both the green line as well as the red line, and that's kind of just representing this relationship that I mentioned above about higher strike prices leading to lower deltas in a graphical form. I want to take a bit of time also to dive into what this means in terms of like the higher volatility versus the low volatility. Okay, well, between November and January, what we saw was a period of fairly high volatility in Bitcoin, right? We saw Bitcoin go from 64K all the way down to the 30K range, the 40K range. And that was a tremendous amount of volatility during that time. Bitcoin was moving around quite a bit. More recently, in the right now, in the last couple of months, we've been seeing kind of Bitcoin go into more of a low volatility kind of environment. Bitcoin's price is not kind of making large up moves, large down moves as much as before, and hence why it's a bit of a lower volatility environment right now. Now, one of the things that I want to highlight here is that back in a higher volatility environment, back with this red graph, you see a much more gentler slope. All this means is that delta is not changing as quickly over these different strike prices, right? Whereas compared to the green line, compared to that lower volatility environment like right now, is a much more aggressive slope. It's much more steeper slope going down. Oops, it's much more steeper slope going down, basically, all that means is that delta is changing actually quite rapidly over these different strike prices. The difference in behavior around how the delta values change in a lower volatility environment versus a higher volatility environment, this actually has huge ramifications around how likely it is that we find a position within the constraints of our pre-existing strategy. So once again, like I mentioned before, the way that our strategy finds a position is it's looking at a specific delta range. So for the purposes of this example, let's say that the delta range that we're looking at is -0.1 to -0.15. So this means that I only take a position if I find a strike price, right, that's between -0.10 and -0.15. And to help illustrate that, I kind of drew this blue band between those two delta values, this blue horizontal band there. So on this graph, if we ignore the green line, if we just look at the red line, say we're in a higher volatility environment right now, what the strategy is trying to do is it's basically looking at the red line and it's saying, in this blue band right here, right, can I find an intersection where the red line, which represents, of course, the different delta values over the different strike prices, can I find a intersection between the red line and one of these orange lines right here? These orange lines are basically just listed strike prices on Deribit, right? We have 33K, we have 34K, 35K, 36K, etc. Basically, the strategy is saying, okay, in this blue band, can I find an intersection between the red line and one of these orange lines that happens within this blue band, right? And so right now, as we kind of go from left to right, we of course do see such an intersection, right? We see an intersection right here. We see where basically the red line intersects this $33,000 strike price, this orange line within this blue band, right? And bingo, right? We found a position that fits within this delta range that we're looking for, and we have a position for this week. But if we look at this green line, say, okay, now we zoom forward to the present. Right now it's a lower volatility environment. Well, let's do the same exercise, right? Are we able to find an intersection where the green line intersects one of these strike prices, one of these orange lines? So as we look from left to right, yes, it intersects it, but we don't see any intersections that happen within this blue band, within this blue delta range that we want. And so, this we see, of course, the closest one, it's here and it's here, but the intersections happen just outside the blue band, right? It's below zero, it's above -0.1 and it's below -0.15. Where these intersections are happening. So basically, there's none of the listed strike prices is actually within the delta range that we desire, that we were specifically looking for. And that's basically what's happening each of these weeks over the past few months, where we haven't been finding a position. And when you kind of reason about it, it kind of makes a bit of sense, right? When you have this kind of steeper graph going here with the green line, and you have the same, and we're still looking at the same delta range, we're still looking at the same kind of vertical distance, right, with the blue band, it kind of makes sense that it's probably less likely in a lower volatility environment where the curve is steeper, where it's less likely to find the intersection that actually happens within that blue band, that's a specific blue band that we're looking at. And hence why with this pre-existing recurring short put strategy that we have right now, we've been seeing a lot more gap times, because there's a lot more weeks where we just simply don't see a strike price within our desired delta band. So that's really a quick explainer on why we've been seeing these gaps. It's really a combination of decreased volatility in the Bitcoin market, how options behave in higher versus lower volatility environments, combined with the way that the strategy itself is looking for positions, right? This very rigid kind of delta range that where we're scanning for strike prices, where we're scanning for these intersections. Like I mentioned at the top of the video, the purpose of this video, however, is not just to explain, why these gaps have been happening. It's also to outline, what we're going to do about it and how we're going to fix it and address it moving forward now that we've kind of identified it as an issue. So I wanted to go through some of these things that we're doing right now to address it. Number one, we're closing a quant hire. We're closing the hire right now within this week. And after they come on board, it's probably going to still take them a couple of months to spin up in terms of putting their own spin and improvements onto our existing backtesting framework and infrastructure, as well as, of course, looking at the current strategy, ideating around improvements to the current strategies, as well as ideating around, of course, new strategies as well. Bringing on board this quant hire is just going to make it so much easier and quicker to iterate upon the current strategy that we have, as well as, of course, scaling up the number of strategies moving forward. Number two, we want to introduce and start looking at more sophisticated strategies that take into account different volatility environments that we can encounter, such as the lower volatility environment right now compared to the higher volatility environment from a few months ago, and of course be able to optimize for greater consistency and frequency of trades. We hear you when you say that this has been frustrating, and we really want to make sure that as part of our strategy development efforts the next little bit, that we kind of make sure that the strategies that we're coming out with moving forward are a lot more consistent and frequent in terms of trades that are happening. Number three, strategy baskets. This is still an idea, still early stage. We haven't really dived deep into it yet, but it's basically the gist of the idea is that, hey, maybe we can kind of bundle strategies together where you press one button and then it kind of allocates your Bitcoin across these different strategies. And then you have a situation where even if one strategy is experiencing some downtime, experiencing some gaps, another strategy can kind of pick up the slack, right? And the other strategies might be be able to pick positions at that point. And so that's just an idea, something that we're considering as well moving forward. So that's about it in terms of this video. Definitely a longer video compared to our other videos so far, but I really wanted to make sure that we give you a detailed picture in terms of what's been causing all this downtime and annoying downtime that's been happening lately, and of course what we're going to do about it moving forward. We really appreciate your patience. We really appreciate the feedback and love that you've been giving us as part of this whole process. We've learned a lot from the past few months, as you guys all know, and we're really excited to put those learnings into action and basically improve our product, not just from a UI UX product standpoint, but of course also from the strategy development standpoint. And we think that once we kind of unblock these things, once we kind of make these significant improvements, we're going to really be able to open up the floodgates, scale up the number of users, increase the limits, increase the investment limits as well for each individual as we kind of make these improvements to the strategies themselves as well. So yeah, that's about it for me today. Thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon in our next Transparency Tuesday.